D&D, everyone's favorite role-playing game. Sit down with some snacks and minis and pretend you and some friends aren't just playing make-believe away from the judgmental eyes of the world. There's a whole lot that goes into a good D&D game. A proper big bad, good plot hooks, proper balancing of threats of course, but something more subtle can really add to the experience. Something that in theory can be easy to add, but in practice I've found to be hard to truly implement well, and that's making the background of the world feel like it's just as lively as the foreground. Now when I say the background of a world, I don't mean its backstory or the setting details in general. Those can be done with time put into them and some decent writing fleshing out the bits that make the world feel like it has a history. When I say background, I mean what's occurring in the scene your adventurers are in while they do whatever sociopathic thing they're going to be doing, creating the feeling of a world that actively has things going on in it, rather than some heavily scripted video game that waits for X, Y, and Z to be fulfilled before anything of note happens, and if you try to sneak back the invisible wall, you get smited. Smote. Smot? The background you're setting can be all sorts of things, as is fitting for a role-playing game. It can be the peasants surrounding a castle, going about their daily lives, or the larger scope of a battle the heroes are just a part of. Hell, if you're playing a setting you all have some familiarity with, you can just refer to the source material and make a solid background off that. In a Star Wars-based game I was a part of, the first few levels were on Korriban, and at one point the DM just said, "You are in the torture room from Knights of the Old Republic," and immediately we all had a perfect visual image in our minds. With that being said, how do you make this atmosphere possible? I don't think it's something you can just easily do. Too little effort put into it, and the campaign can be, like I said before, a series of heavily scripted encounters like a bad video game that make the players feel like the world only exists to serve them. Which, to be fair, is true, but that's not usually what you want to be thinking about during a session of D&D. But if you exposition dump on the players at every possible moment, it's the opposite. You've just entered the worst history class you've ever had, where the teacher just doesn't shut the fuck up for the entire period, and even if it's the most interesting thing in the world and you love history, you blank out after 10 minutes and start thinking of Karl Franz and... sorry about that, just projecting a bit. How do you find that happy middle ground? Where the fuck even is the happy middle ground? Well, that answer depends on the context of the game. If you're just exploring a cave or a dungeon, for instance, maybe a passing mention every now and then of something occurring as the players march through. Depending on what exactly they're exploring, it could be something slow and steady, like a drip of water as they advance through a dimly lit cave, bats swarming towards them as they enter an underground opening, or the wail of far-off wraiths if it's a spooky cave. Or say they come to a tavern. As they walk in, make mentions of the customers gossiping about local events. Hell, you can even have it be about something the players did. Maybe word is spread about the heroes who fought off the horde of rampaging orcs single-handedly and drove back the green tide. Or maybe once they open the doors, whispers abound about the rogue who was spotted plowing old MacDonald sheep in the middle of the night like it was harvest season. That's something a friend of mine did perfectly in a game he ran. The background talk, not the sheep fucking. There were issues we each had with the game, sure, but one thing I have to give him credit for is this kind of background storytelling. He hit the nail on the head for making the world feel believable when we entered a town and the inhabitants talked about various topics as we walked by, or when we passed by merchants traveling back and forth in places we had visited before. Then Spiderbot started lobotomizing my townsfolk and the world kind of stopped being fun after that. Two issues I think really come into this. One is the balancing act, of course. Too little and the world is a bad video game. Too much and it feels like homework. The other is something that there's no easy solution for avoiding. Opportunity cost, if you'll forgive the economics. Every moment the DM is describing the background is a moment he's not doing something else. Because while the story revolves around the players, the world and game itself revolve around the DM. Time spent creating atmosphere is time not spent having plot relevant or just interesting things in general happen. Go too far and your game could flip to where it feels like the world is completely real, but so real it's boring because 90% of the dialogue and discoveries made are about the ways that dockyard workers are hauling goods from port or whatever. As a DM, you've got to find the ideal balance, not only for yourself and the story, but most importantly for your players. If you have a bunch of history majors in your game, then hit them up with the extended background talk. They'll probably enjoy hearing about the window tax riots or some shit. If you've got 3 players sitting on their phones and one who's railing on coke, maybe cut down the talk on trade negotiations, Senator Palpatine. One last thing that helps sells the world is to mention background events that are important for the world itself, but only so relevant to the players. Like maybe you walk through a town and some of the villagers make some comments about the harvest being bad this year. Nothing major, of course, just a little brief mention when they're asking around the town for what's going on, stuff like that. Or merchants bitch about tax hikes when they visit the shop. Yeah, I know I said avoid becoming a Star Wars prequel, but it's a matter of scale, again. One mention in passing is like spinning. It's a good trick. Constantly mention that stuff and it becomes Dungeons and Dragons and Mike's water cooler break bitching session. Like I said before though, there's no one solid way for each game or group. Depends on the DM who's running the campaign, the setting, and of course the players themselves. Just know your audience and have a bit of an image in your head on what the day-to-day occurrences of your world are, and the rest should hopefully flow relatively naturally. And if not, just copy and paste a bunch of mundane discussions from movies and games and switch the names around. Naboo could probably be in Elf City, doesn't even need a name change. Hope this little essay ran helped you develop your campaign, or help you yell at your DM who's running a campaign that sounds like an A-push review. Thanks for watching, and take care. And this probably goes without saying, but just remember that every NPC you even mention in passing is either going to be the player's new favorite character or a murder victim on some future killing spree. It always happens. What are you going to do?